there's something I want you to think about before we start. Somewhere near you right now, on your wrist or on a bedside table or in a pocket or on a phone, there is a device that is doing something we spent thousands of years trying to figure out how to do reliably. It's measuring time. Not the big philosophical time, not the kind that keeps philosophers up at night, the small, practical, everyday kind. The kind that tells you when to leave, when to arrive, when something started, how long something has been going on. You probably glanced at the time today dozens of times. Without consciously registering most of those glances, it's become that embedded, that automatic. The small act of checking your wrist or your phone or the clock on the wall is so routine that it barely registers as an action at all. For most of human history, the overwhelming majority of it, you couldn't do that. You couldn't carry time with you. Time was something fixed in the landscape, in the position of the sun, in the bells of a church tower, in the cycles of tides and seasons. It lived in the world, not on your person. And if you were somewhere the sun wasn't visible, or the bells couldn't be heard, you simply didn't know what time it was precisely. The wristwatch changed that. It made time personal, portable, something you wore. And today I want to tell you the story of how it got to your wrist, because it got there through war, through the hands of women workers in Swiss valleys, through the trenches of the First World War, where men who had considered wristwatches effeminate suddenly found them to be the difference between life and death, through aviation and sport and space travel and the digital revolution. It's a beautiful story, and I think it's worth knowing, so get comfortable. I'm Alexandra, welcome to the hidden life of things. Let me start at the beginning. Not the very beginning, not sundials and water clocks, though those are fascinating in their own right. Let me start with the pocket watch, because the pocket watch is the direct ancestor of the wristwatch, and understanding why people carried time in their pockets for several centuries tells you something important about why the move to the wrist was so significant. The mechanical clock, a device that measures time through the controlled release of stored energy using a series of gears and an escapement mechanism, was developed in medieval Europe. Probably in the late 13th century, the earliest mechanical clocks were enormous, tower clocks built into church steeples and civic buildings. They were expensive and fixed. They told a community what time it was by striking bells. Time was public, shared, announced. Making clocks smaller, small enough to carry, required advances in miniaturisation that took centuries to develop. The spring-driven clock, which replaced the heavy hanging weights of early tower clocks with a coiled spring as the energy source, made smaller, portable clocks possible. By the 16th century, spring-driven clocks small enough to be worn or carried were being made in Germany and Switzerland. These early portable timepieces were more jewellery than instrument, honestly. Large, often ornate, egg-shaped or drum-shaped objects worn as pendants or carried in pouches. They were not particularly accurate. A good one might drift by 15 minutes a day, which by modern standards is essentially useless. But they were portable time. A person could carry the approximate hour with them. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the pocket watch had evolved into the form most of us recognize from period dramas, a round, flat case, usually hinged to protect the face, attached to a chain that fixed it to a waistcoat or jacket. Accuracy had improved dramatically. A well-made pocket watch by the 18th century could keep time to within a minute or two a day. Navigators used them to calculate longitude at sea. Knowing the exact time in Greenwich while observing the position of the sun told you precisely how far east or west of Greenwich you were. Pocket watches in this context were navigation instruments. They were how the age of exploration could be precise rather than merely approximate. Through the 19th century, the pocket watch was a marker of status, of respectability, of a certain kind of established presence in the world. A gentleman had a pocket watch. It was part of the vocabulary of how a well-ordered person presented themselves. The watch chain across a waistcoat was as much a signifier of character as the cut of a coat. And women? Women had wristwatches, small, delicate, often highly jeweled watches worn on a bracelet, designed as accessories, decorative as much as functional. The wristwatch in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was considered in the polite, slightly condescending language of the era a women's thing, an ornament, a pretty piece of jewelry that happened to tell time. Men wore pocket watches because they were serious instruments for serious people, and then came 1914. The First World War, which began in August 1914 and did not end until November 1918, was among its many terrible distinctions the first modern war. Modern in the sense that its violence was industrial in scale and precision. Modern in the sense that it required coordination between enormous numbers of people moving across vast distances, conducting operations that depended on everyone doing specific things at specific moments. Coordination required time. A military offensive in the First World War was a precisely timed operation. Artillery would fire for a specific duration, say at 5:30 a.m. for 30 minutes to break up enemy wire and suppress defensive positions. Then at 6 a.m. exactly, infantry would advance. If the infantry moved at 5:55, they would advance under their own artillery fire. If they moved at 6:05, the enemy would have had 5 minutes to recover from the bombardment and return to their positions. The margin for error was minutes, sometimes seconds, and that margin was measured in lives. Officers needed to know the time, not approximately, precisely, and they needed to know it while their hands were occupied holding a rifle, directing men, signaling, using a map, crawling through mud. Reaching into a pocket for a watch was not always possible. It was sometimes impossible. And in a trench, in the chaos of an advance, in the dark before dawn, fumbling with a watch chain was a gesture that could kill you. The solution was already in existence. It was just considered unmasculine. Officers, initially British officers and then officers across the Allied and Central Power armies, began strapping their pocket watches to their wrists using leather straps. Sometimes purpose-made straps, sometimes improvised with whatever leather or cord was available. The wristwatch was not yet a standard military issue. It was a personal adaptation, a practical response to a practical problem. By 1915 and 1916, purpose-built military wristwatches were being produced at scale. The key features were different from civilian watches. They needed to be robust, legible in low light, and resistant to mud, water, and temperature extremes of the Western Front. Luminous paint, radium-based, was applied to hands and numerals so that time could be read in a darkened trench without using a light that might reveal a position to an enemy sniper. Wire lugs, small loops of metal soldered to the case, held leather straps firmly. The face was designed to be read at a glance from any angle without needing to adjust your hand. The trench watch, as it became known, was a functional object designed under extreme conditions for extreme purposes, and the men who used it, who came home from the war having worn a watch on their wrist through years of the most intense experience of their lives, did not take the watch off when they got back. The wristwatch came home from the First World War as a man's accessory. The stigma of femininity had been annihilated by the Western Front. A generation of men had worn wristwatches in conditions that made any question of social acceptability completely irrelevant. After 1918, the wristwatch was simply what you wore. The pocket watch never fully recovered. Here is the part of the story that I think deserves much more attention than it usually gets. While men were wearing watches in the trenches, women were making them. The Swiss watch industry, which had been the dominant force in precision timepiece manufacturing since the 18th century, was, in its operational reality, built substantially on female labor. Not at the executive level, not in the public-facing roles, but in the workshops where the actual work of watchmaking happened. Swiss watchmaking in the 19th and early 20th centuries operated through a system called adaptations, essentially a cottage industry model where components were distributed to workers in their homes and in small workshops throughout the valleys and villages of the Jura Mountains and the area around Geneva and Les Locles and Les Chaux-de-Fonds. Workers would receive components, assemble specific subsections, and return them. The whole system was intensely divided. Different workers specialized in different components, different operations. The work of assembling and finishing watch movements, tiny, precise, incredibly delicate work, was done in significant proportion by women. The work required fine motor skills, patience, excellent close vision, and the ability to work for long hours in careful, concentrated attention. Women were paid less than men for this work. They were not celebrated for it. The famous names on Swiss watches, Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, Longines, Rolex, were the names of the men who owned and managed and marketed. The names of the women who built the movements were not recorded in the same way. In Les Chaux-de-Fonds, a city in the Swiss Jura that is essentially the watchmaking capital of the world, so dedicated to the industry that its entire urban layout was designed in a grid specifically to maximize natural light and workshop spaces, women made up a substantial portion of the watchmaking workforce. The city itself, with its rational, disciplined grid of streets designed around the light requirements of precision craftwork, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site today. It is, in a sense, a monument to the industry, and the industry was built in large part by hands that history forgot to name. There's also a darker dimension to this story that I want to name plainly. The luminous paint applied to First World War and interwar era watch dials to make them readable in darkness was based on radium. Radium is radioactive. This was not fully understood in the 1910s and 1920s, but the danger became tragically clear through the story of the Radium Girls. In the United States, in factories in New Jersey and Illinois, young women were employed to paint watch dials with radium-based luminous paint. The work required a fine brush tip, and workers were actually instructed to shape their brushes with their lips, to put the brush in their mouth, pull it to a fine point, dip it in the radium paint, apply it to the dial, over and over all day. The women were told the paint was safe. They were sometimes told it was beneficial even. Radium was fashionable in the early 20th century, appearing in health tonics and beauty products with a kind of quack enthusiasm. It was not safe. The women absorbed radium into their bodies, and radium, once ingested, behaves like calcium, and it deposits itself in bone. The women began to suffer, their bones deteriorated, several developed radiation-related cancers, they died. A group of them, the Radium Girls as they became known, sued their employers in the late 1920s. The case was one of the first major legal challenges around occupational safety and employer responsibility for workplace harm. They won. The settlement was modest and came too late for those who had already died, but the legal precedent that employers had a duty of care to workers regarding known workplace hazards was significant. The wristwatch has this history in it too, not just the trenches, the workshops, the hands that made the movements, the women who painted the dials and paid a price for it that nobody told them they would pay. I want to spend some time with Switzerland specifically because the Swiss watch industry is not just an industry, it's a cultural institution, a national identity. And in the 20th century, it became the site of one of the most significant industrial battles in the history of consumer goods. Le Chaux-de-Fonds and Le Locle, the twin cities in Swiss watchmaking in the Jura Mountains, developed their industries in the 18th and 19th centuries in conditions that were, in a way, almost accidental. The Jura Valley winters were long and harsh. Agricultural work was limited for months at a time. Watchmaking, which required no special materials, could be done indoors by a single person or family with a relatively small set of specialized tools. It spread through the valley the way a craft spreads when there is time and need and the gradual accumulation of shared knowledge. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Swiss watchmaking had achieved a level of quality and precision that was effectively unmatched anywhere in the world. The names that emerged from the period, Patek Philippe, founded in Geneva in 1839, Longines, established in Saint-Imier in 1832, Omega from Biel and Bien in 1848, IWC, founded in Schaffhausen in 1868, Rolex, registered in Geneva in 1915. These were not just watch companies, they were institutions of extraordinary precision craft, each developing their own particular approaches to accuracy, to reliability, to the design of a movement. A Swiss mechanical watch, a good one, made with care, is a staggering object when you stop to think about it. A modern mechanical wristwatch movement might contain anywhere from 130 to 500 or more individual components. Tiny gears, springs, levers, jewels, synthetic rubies used as bearings because of their hardness and smoothness, assembled by hand or by precision machines into a mechanism that fits inside a case smaller than a coin. The mainspring, when wound, stores energy. The escapement, a rocking lever that engages with the escape wheel in a precise tick-tock rhythm, releases that energy in controlled increments. The balance wheel oscillates back and forth, typically at frequencies of 6, 8, or 10 beats per second, regulating the release. Every gear in the chain is calculated to transmit motion at a specific ratio, translating the beats of the balance wheel into the rotation of the minute hand at exactly the right speed. It is, in the most literal sense, a machine for measuring time, built to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter, designed to function continuously for decades if properly maintained, accurate to within a few seconds per day. And through the mid-20th century, Swiss watches dominated the world market. They were precision instruments, status symbols, luxury objects, and utterly practical tools simultaneously. A good watch meant something. It said something about the person who wore it, about the care they took with important things, about their relationship to time and quality and the longer view. And then in the 1970s, the industry nearly died. This is the part of the story where the Swiss watch industry encountered something that threatened to destroy it entirely, and I think it's one of the most interesting industrial stories of the 20th century. In 1969, a Japanese company called Seiko released the Astron, the world's first commercially available quartz wristwatch. Instead of a mechanical movement powered by a wound spring, the Astron used a tiny quartz crystal oscillating at 8,192 vibrations per second, regulated by a circuit to keep time. The accuracy was extraordinary. Where a good mechanical watch might gain or lose seconds per day, a quartz watch gained or lost seconds per month. It was dramatically more accurate. It required no winding, it was cheaper to produce, and it was smaller. The Swiss watch industry watched this development and initially failed to grasp its implications. They had invested generations in the perfection of mechanical watchmaking. They had the finest craftspeople, the most refined movements, the most prestigious names. Quartz seemed like a curiosity, a gadget. By the mid-1970s, the Swiss industry was in a crisis. Quartz watches from Japan and Hong Kong were flooding the global market at prices Swiss manufacturers couldn't match. Companies that had operated for over a century were failing. The number of people employed in Swiss watchmaking dropped from over 90,000 in the early 1970s to around 30,000 by the early 1980s. The carnage was real and significant. The recovery, when it came, was built on a genuinely creative decision. In the early 1980s, the Swiss engineer named Nicholas Hayek helped lead the development of a new kind of watch, affordable, colorful, made of plastic, powered by quartz. It was called the Swatch, short for Swiss watch, simple, direct, cheerful. The Swatch was not trying to compete on prestige or precision. It was competing on personality, on color, on the idea that a watch could be a fashion accessory, something you owned several of, something you chose to match your mood or your outfit. It was cheap enough to be disposable in a way that a mechanical watch never was. The Swatch worked. It sold in enormous quantities. It stabilized the Swiss industry and gave it the financial foundation to continue investing in the high-end mechanical watches that had always been its real identity. And that high-end market did something unexpected as the 20th century ended and the 21st began. It grew. As quartz watches became ubiquitous and cheap, as digital watches appeared, as phones began displaying the time, as clocks appeared on every device everywhere, the mechanical watch lost its functional purpose entirely. Nobody needed a mechanical watch to know the time. Your phone told you. Your computer told you. The microwave told you. And somehow, as the functional need evaporated, the desire for a mechanical watch grew, not despite the fact that a phone is more accurate, but because of it. The mechanical watch became something else entirely, a piece of craft, a connection to human ingenuity across centuries. A thing that works without a battery, without software, without any external power source except the motion of a human wrist. Something that your grandfather might have worn, that your father might have worn, that you might one day pass to someone who cares. A mechanical watch in 2026 is not a timekeeping device, it is a philosophical object, an argument worn on the wrist about what we choose to value in a world where everything is digital, replaceable, and cheaply made. The watch today exists in more forms than at any point in its history, and I think it's worth taking a moment with some of them because each one tells you something about what we expect from time and from the objects we use to measure it. The digital watch arrived commercially in the early 1970s, beginning with LED displays, those bright red numerals that required a button press to illuminate because they drained batteries so fast, and evolving into the LCD displays that are still common today. The Casio F91W, introduced in 1991, became arguably the most successful watch in history. Hundreds of millions sold, still in production, still available for a few pounds or dollars. Lightweight, accurate, practically indestructible within ordinary life, with a battery that lasts years. The sports watch evolved through the latter half of the 20th century to meet specific needs. The dive watch, water-resistant to significant depths, with a rotating bezel to track elapsed time underwater. The chronograph, a watch with a built-in stopwatch function used by pilots, racing drivers, and navigators. The field watch, built for legibility and durability in outdoor conditions, descended directly from the military watches of the First World War. Each type is a functional response to a specific demand, and each has developed its own aesthetics, its own traditions, its own devoted communities. Rolex's Submariner, introduced in 1953, was designed as a professional diving instrument. It became one of the most recognizable objects in the world, worn by James Bond, associated with success and adventure, copied and counterfeited at an industrial scale. The Submariner is now a cultural object as much as a horological one. When someone wears a submariner, they're wearing a set of associations as much as a watch. The associations are complex and not always entirely honest, but they are real. The Omega Speedmaster, chosen by NASA as its official watch for the Apollo missions after rigorous testing in 1965, went to the moon. The Speedmaster Professional is still sold today, essentially unchanged in most respects, from the watch that astronauts wore on the lunar surface. When you put one on, you're wearing something that has, in its identical form, been to another world. This is not nothing. And then there is the smartwatch, the Apple Watch, launched in 2015, the Samsung Galaxy Watch, the Garmin series, beloved by runners and hikers, the Fitbit and its descendants. These are computers on the wrist, capable of measuring heart rate, blood oxygen, sleep quality, activity levels, receiving notifications, playing music, making payments. They do things no pocket watch or mechanical wristwatch ever dreamed of. And yet, here is the thing I find most interesting. They have not replaced the mechanical watch. They exist alongside it. Different people choose different things, and many people choose both, wearing a fitness tracker during the day and a mechanical watch for evenings or special occasions. The functions have separated from each other. The smartwatch is for health monitoring and connectivity. The mechanical watch is for something else entirely. What that something else is, that's the question. The watch, over its history, has meant different things. It has meant precision, the navigational instrument, the military tool, the thing that made coordinated action possible. It has meant status, the pocket watch on its chain, the luxury Swiss brand, the signal of arrival and success. It has meant practicality, the Trent watch, the field watch, the Casio that simply tells the time reliably for years. It has meant connection, the watch passed from father to child, the timepiece worn on a significant occasion, the object that holds a memory of someone no longer here. And now, in the 2020s, I think it means something new as well, or something old seen freshly. We live in a world of infinite digital distraction. Every glance at a phone is an invitation to go somewhere else, a notification, a headline, a social feed, an endless queue of things demanding attention. Checking the time on a phone is never just checking the time. It is entering a space that will try to hold you. Checking the time on a watch is just checking the time. A glance, a gesture, a piece of information received in less than a second, and then back to where you are. The watch asks nothing of you. It does not notify, it does not scroll, it does not have opinions about what you should look at next. It simply tells you where you are in the day. There is a growing community of people, particularly among those who grew up with smartphones, who have known no other way, who wear watches specifically for this reason, to have one device on their person that does exactly one thing and does it without asking for anything in return. The watch as a boundary, the watch as a small act of reclamation. The women in the workshops of La Chaux-de-Fonds, bending over tiny movements in winter light, did not know they were making objects that would one day carry this meaning. The officers in the trenches, strapping their pocket watches to their wrists in the dark before an advance, were not thinking about digital detox. The radium girls painting luminous dials in New Jersey could not have imagined a world where the thing they were making would be worn by astronauts on the moon. But here we are. With this object on our wrists, this thing that started as jewellery, became a necessity of war, was built by uncelebrated hands in mountain valleys, was nearly destroyed by a crystal the size of a grain of rice, and survived to become both a luxury and a philosophy, and sometimes just the thing you glance at to know you have enough time. Every watch carries that whole story, all of it, in the movement, in the case, in the way the hands move. It is, when you think about it, a very good way to carry time. So the next time you check your watch or notice someone else check theirs, just hold that image for a second. An officer in a trench in 1916 strapping his watch to his wrist in the dark. A woman in the Jura Mountains bending over a tiny movement with a fine pair of tweezers making something precise and small and beautiful in winter light. An astronaut on the surface of the moon glancing at a speedmaster. And you, wherever you are, with time on your wrist. The same idea, the same human need, the same small revolution of carrying the hour with you rather than waiting for it to be announced. Time is ordinary, the watch is ordinary, and both of them, when you look closely, are extraordinary. History isn't only in museums. Sometimes it's in the quiet tick on your wrist, marking every second you're alive. If this is the kind of episode you want more of, Slow, detailed, a bit like thinking out loud about something you've never thought about before, The Hidden Life of Things is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen. Do follow along. I love knowing that there are so many of you out there listening. And if there's someone in your life who wears a watch, who has always worn a watch, who you've always associated with a particular watch on a particular wrist, this one is for them. And here's your clue for next time. It saved more lives in the 20th century than almost any other discovery in human history. A scientist found it by accident in a petri dish he was about to throw away. But here is the thing most people don't know. The thing he found in that dish had been known about for centuries before he ever walked into that lab. Honey, garlic, moldy bread. The story of how we learn to fight infection is not just a story about laboratories. It is a story about kitchens, about grandmothers, about the gap between knowing something works and knowing why it works. Stay curious. I'm Alexandra, and I'll talk to you next week.